Greetings and a warm welcome to everyone to the second session of International Research Seminar Series organized by Flame University School of Communication. My name is Chetna Munga and I'll be the moderator of this session today. I'm associated with Flame University as Assistant Professor, Media and Journalism Department. With me, along with the guest, I have my head of the department, Dr. Preeta Menon, who would like to share the philosophy behind the International Research Seminar Series. Over to you, Dr. Preeta.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chetna. For all of you who have joined in so early in the morning here in India, thank you so much for being a part of this seminar series. The International Seminar Series hosted by Flame School of Communication is a plan or an idea that is created so that researchers and scholars, young early career researchers can join in for this seminar series, which is absolutely free for all, to collaborate, to learn from the leaders, and to be able to, at the end of the series, at least have a plan for their research careers going forward. So our endeavor is, beyond just these short talks, to say that if some of you also get the idea of how you want to take your careers in terms of research forward, that would be it would be a feather in our cap too. And we have lined up several speakers in this series, many of them editors of A and A-star journals, associate editors. These are people who have been strong, almost legendary researchers in the areas of marketing and communications. But more so, they are in the know-how of what it takes to publish papers. So they will also be giving you tips and ideas on how you can create research papers that will be favorably looked at by these top-tier journals. Yesterday was our inaugural session. We had Professor Raj Sethuraman, who was the editor of the Journal of Retailing, Professor Justin Paul, who was the editor-in-chief of the international, who is rather the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Consumer Studies, and Mr. Vivek Balraman, who is heading data research. So we had both aspects of industry-led research as well as academic research and where they meet. Today we have Dr. Rajat Roy, and lined up in the coming months between July, which is now, and December 2021, that is the next 6 months, we have lined up researchers, like Dr. Aparna Labru, Dr. Russell Belk, Dr. Stefano Puntoni, and so many others that we hope will help you. Apart from this, we are also looking at conducting small workshops during this 6-month period over weekends, where you could have a writing workshop, a research hackathon, where we take it from idea to, proposal stage with all of you. So this is primarily what we hope to do. In the International Research Seminar Series, we have 3 tracks. These 3 tracks are largely contemporary issues in marketing and communications, methods in research, and industry-led research. So while we bring in speakers, we will ensure that there is a good mix of knowing the new topics, impactful topics, learning methods that you need to use to reach there, and also working on topics that are industry relevant, because we are in the space of management. We have to have topics that are relevant to the outside community, to society, governments, and businesses, as we say. So this is what I wanted. This was the 2 bits that I wanted to tell you about the seminar series, and we want you to watch out for it. All of you who have registered today will receive emails for when these seminar series are, as in the next session is planned for August, and you will get emailers and reminders for when it is, and you can register for those events as well. That's all from me, Chetna. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Menon. I think she very elaborately and very nicely explained the entire agenda behind this research seminar series. And I would really like to acknowledge and appreciate the efforts Dr. Menon has put in along with people at Flame to bring this platform to us. So thank you so much, the researcher and the publisher who's an expert in the area herself. So thank you, Dr. Menon. Looking forward to hear more from you about all this. Going to the session's topic today. So the topic for the session is impactful experimental research, and it gives me an immense pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Rajat Roy, an equally impactful person in this area, to talk about it. Allow me to share some academic accomplishments of Dr. Roy with you here. So Dr. Roy is an associate professor at Bond Business School, Australia. He's published in highly reputed and leading marketing journals like European Journal of Marketing, Journal of Business Research, Journal of Advertising, Journal of Consumer Psychology, and many more. He's chaired the marketing conferences and attended invited talks at reputed universities across Australia, Japan, and here in India. His wide service in the academia has evidenced through his role as an associate editor and editorial member of several prestigious journals. I'm sure he'll give us more details around it. He's also served as a deputy chair of Strategic Review Board in a major Australian university, taught several marketing courses and over different parts of the world, and has secured many private and government grants. He's an expert in the area of consumer behavior and experimental design. A very warm welcome, Dr. Roy, and thank you for doing this session with us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Chetna. To begin it, I would really like to thank Flame University for this fantastic opportunity. I'd like to reconfirm what Professor Pritha Menon has said. It's really exciting to start the research journey, to continue the research journey if you're a mid-career researcher. It's always exciting to see your ideas get published in top-end journals. So I think what a fantastic effort from Flame University. But I reckon I owe a big thank you to Dr. Dishan Kamdar, the Vice Chancellor of Flame University. I'd also like to thank Professor Sajid Narayan, who's Associate Dean, Faculty of Communications. Nevertheless, I could not thank enough Professor Pritha Menon, who's the head of Department of School of Communication, and of course, Professor Chetna Monga for moderating this session. I'm really happy I'm here because at my career stage, I'm excited to share with others what I know in terms of experimental design. I've been an experimental designer and a consumer behavior researcher for the last 16 or 15 years. I published in many journals. It is a challenging journey. It is an exciting journey. It's an intrinsic, fulfilling journey, but it's all worth doing it. So give me a few minutes. I'll bring up my slides and I'll give you a little bit more about myself, what I do about my university, and then we can straight away dive into experimental design. So I'm excited.
In the meantime, I would like to give few instructions to my attendees here. So Dr. Rajat, you could set up and get started. For the attendees here, please keep posting your questions in the Q&A box as and when they come to your mind. We'll try and address those questions during the session, maybe twice. We'll break the sessions into parts as deemed appropriate by the instructor here. Request you to put your name and your credentials so that we can acknowledge your value addition to the session. Dr. Roy has been kind enough to share his published paper in the Journal of Advertising titled as Examining Regulatory Focus in the Information Processing of Imagery and Analytical Advertisements. I'm sure we'll be talking about it during the session as well. My team shall share the same with all the attendees once the session is done. If you choose to talk about us on social media, please don't forget to tag Flame University. So that is all from my side. I pass on the floor to Dr. Rajat here. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chetna, once again. So once again, good afternoon, because I'm in Australia. I'm in Gold Coast, Australia, and it's kind of 2:45-ish here. So a very good afternoon to all our global audiences. My name is Dr. Rajat Roy. Of course, you can tell I'm Indian. I'm an associate professor of marketing from Bond Business School. I would like to share a bit of information about Bond University. It's situated in the beautiful Gold Coast. We have the best surfing waves in the world. It's the international destination for surfing. Some of you may know that for 2032, we are the host, we're the co-host for Olympics, Brisbane City and Gold Coast. You may also know that Time magazine has published a list of 100 top destinations, and Gold Coast is the only destination from Australia, the only destination from Australia to be on that list. So we have got movie stars walking on the street here. We have got surfers, surfing the waves here. It's a very glamorous place. Around the year, sunshine. Of course, I'm part of Queensland. The state is Queensland. Gold Coast is a city in Queensland. The capital is Brisbane, is sunshine. So we call it Sunshine State. So Bond University is a not-for-profit private university. We are a smallish university. The public universities here are pretty large. So we have a student body of 4,500. We have got 4 faculty. I belong to the Faculty of Business, but we also have Faculty of Health Sciences or Medicine. So the Faculty of Business is very elite. We are a small university. We're a boutique kind of university, and we have well-trained academics sitting in the business school. I'm one of them. So we do research, we teach, and we are all excited about what we do, mainly about sharing our knowledge. So I hope some of you may visit Gold Coast, some of you may visit Bond University, and I look forward to that day when I can say hello to you. So today's research seminar is called Impactful Experimental Research, Methods in Research. So my talk would focus on experimental design, which I have practiced for the last 15, 16 years. As a part of my talk, I'd also like to say that I'm on the editorial board of several journals, and some of those journals, they focus in advertising/communication. For example, International Journal of Advertising, Journal of Advertising Research. I'm also associate editor for Journal of Creative Communication. If some of you who are young, are new kids on the block, you're trying to engage with research, you're trying to get published, if you're interested in my journal, Journal of Creative Communication, you're most welcome to send your papers, seek my advice. I'll be most happy to help you all. On a different note, if we have PhD students or HDR students, you want my guidance, my inputs with your research design, with your questionnaire design, with data collection, with data analysis, key inputs about the theory, how to write at the front end of your paper, I'll be more than happy to engage with you. For new academics, I offer similar help, right? I'd be really happy to build up my strategic research partnership and help in every possible way that I can. Now, I know it's a one-way monologue kind of thing from my end, so we don't need student introduction. But what's going to happen is after 20, 25 minutes, depending on how Chetna moderates, we might take a break and I might welcome questions through Chetna. So today's seminar is on theory on experimental design. It's a pretty interesting design, because we experience experiments in our everyday life, knowingly, unknowingly. I'm very much excited about it because I'm a researcher who likes to see the world through theoretical lenses, and I'm going to build up on that as we go along. I have chosen one of my papers published in 2014, which Chetna was mentioning, Journal of Advertising. I might bring up the paper and share the screen with you when I'm sharing the nuances of experimental design. I'm going to explain to you step by step what I did for that paper. And like I said, I'm more than happy to address students' queries 20, 25 minutes into my talk. Right. So guys, we know as different researchers, it doesn't matter, whether we belong to the Department of Chemistry, or we belong to the Department of Health Sciences, or we belong to the Department of Business or Business School. We all do research, okay? So we all try and explore and understand the phenomenon around us, right? That's what we're trying to do. So as a marketing researcher, as a communication researcher, I'm trying to compare between 2 different advertisements, which one would be more effective. That's my basic hypothesis. So what I'm trying to say, we are trying to explore the world, understand the phenomenon, and we are engaging research to understand and create scientific knowledge, right? As a process, we are describing, we are classifying information, but our basic idea is to establish relationship. What is causing something, right? And a big and important research strategy is experimental design, because experimental design is the only research method engaged to establish causality. If we say X is causing Y, okay, so in terms of branding, communication, if you think red color has more impact than green color, why? Do you have any theoretical evidence based on the science of color, the psychology of color, that red could be more effective. And as we know, there are marketing brands like Coca-Cola. They have a very iconic red color they use in their packaging, right? That become part of the brand identity. So if you want to understand if color has an impact on communication, on consumer behavior, can we come up with causal evidence, right? If you ask 100 people and if they say they like the red color, that might not be causal evidence. In order to establish that it's the color red that is having a favorable impact on consumer decision, we need to engage in experimental design, right? Now, over the years, people have perfected the experimental design. Now, experimental design started off in different disciplines, like So when you're learning chemistry, you do titration, right? That's experiment. You're tightly controlling for one, liquid to be mixed with the other liquid, and you're waiting for that moment when the color changes. We have all done chemistry lab, right? Now, experimental design also follows the same principle from agriculture. In the past, you treat a plot of land, okay, with fertilizer, and you leave another plot of land without the fertilizer, and you compare the results. That if I add fertilizer to a plot of land, will my yield be better? So that's like the treatment. The treatment here is fertilizer. So what I'm saying, we have borrowed from broader science that, hey, if we manipulate something, if we tweak something, what is going to be the implication on what we are trying to measure? So experimental design follows broader science and scientific knowledge. So over the years, we have perfected different research methods like experiment, quasi-experiment, survey. You may have participated in our questionnaire. You have ticked all the boxes and answered all the questions. That's a survey. We have done case study and naturalistic observation. So each one of this method by itself is a very powerful tool. For example, you can simply observe people and come up with certain hypotheses and provide evidence that something is working in real life, right? But experimental design is the established method to provide evidence for causality, and hence experimental design is such an important design. Think of the current situation, COVID. So how do you know, a vaccine is going to work? Because they have tried and tested that through an experimental design. Without that evidence, we would not be able to administer vaccine. So this is just to underline the importance of experimental design. Now let's share what could be an experimental design, or what could be a simple example of experiment, okay? So look at this slide here. So this is a very well-established phenomenon called the Stroop Effect, S-T-R-O-O-P, Stroop Effect, right? So what researchers do, they have created three conditions. In the match condition, so each color word, so the word red is shown in red color. The word blue is shown in blue color. That is part A. In a mismatch condition, the word red and blue could be shown in a mismatch color. So as you can see from point B, red is shown in blue color, so on and so forth. And in a control condition, we have all the color names, red, blue, in black. So you'll realize that experiment involves comparing different conditions, right? It also involves comparison with a baseline, or also known as a control condition. So what participants were asked to do, they were asked to report the color of the ink. So if they look at a word, okay, red in red color, they have to say what color is the ink. They have to say it's red, okay, not report the color, right? Report the color, not name the word, okay. And in the process, it was found that match versus mismatch condition has different reaction times, right? So what I'm trying to say here is you have a very simple experimental design here with one variable with three different levels, okay? So that three different levels are match condition, mismatch condition, and control condition. And you're measuring people's reaction time, how quickly they can report the color, and you're comparing that reaction time across those three different conditions. That's a very basic experimental design. Now we have experiments, okay, in real life. So think about this. This afternoon when I was preparing myself for this seminar, I was a bit nervous, but my wife says, hey, you have done this hundreds of times before. You're going to smash it. So what happened? She shared with me her feelings, okay, and that in turn motivated me. That's an experiment, right? Imagine you're driving, right? You're trying to get into a shopping mall. However, you don't find a parking space, okay? What happens? You go into a bad mood. I have gone around the shopping mall a few times. I don't have a parking space, and that might have an impact. That resultant mood might have an impact on your shopping behavior. You may say, hey, I'm no longer interested in shopping for today. There's no parking. Let's go back. So basically, what happens is an experimental design involves a hypothesized relationship between an independent variable marked as IV and the dependent variable, but you manipulate the independent variable. For example, you can manipulate someone's mood. If you recall, some time back, I was sharing with you that Queensland is a sunshine state. So if I look outside my window, I'm sitting in my office, it's a lovely day, blue sky, sunshine, that certainly cheers me up, right? So hence you'll find a lot of outdoorsy lifestyle in Queensland. People go out, they surf, they hang out, they go to the beaches, right? However, think about this. If you're living in London, the weather is not so fortunate there. People have a very different lifestyle there. So what I'm saying, weather could have an impact. The resultant mood from weather could have an impact, right? So it involves the independent variable. We manipulate the independent variable, and we study the impact on dependent variable. So the second task was naturally occurring experience in your social life. I have explained that. Let's say you're wearing a nice perfume. Okay, and someone says, hey, that smells really nice. You become happy. That's an experiment, right? And you tend to continue the perfume, okay, as you live your life, right? So these are naturally occurring experiments, but the key idea about experiment is to manipulate what is known as an independent variable and study the impact on a dependent variable. So what are the independent variable and dependent variables? That depends on your theory. So just to reinforce, so an independent variable or an explanatory variable is chosen by the researcher, okay, to determine the effect of manipulation. Now, my Journal of Advertising paper has chosen an independent variable called regulatory focus. So I have manipulated that independent variable, and I've tried to find its impact on advertising effectiveness, right? So that's step one. Step two is really important. Now, experimental design also leads to something called confound variable, confound, right? And hence, to rule out alternate explanation or confound variable, we need controls, okay? We need controls in terms of alternate variables or third variable. I'm going to talk about that. But we also need controls in terms of random assignment of subjects. Let's say you have two different variables. In my Journal of Advertising paper, I have regulatory focus as one independent variable, and I have information processing as a second independent variable. So regulatory focus has two different levels, promotion focus and prevention focus. Information processing has two different levels, known as imagery information and analytical information. So basically, if I cross regulatory focus with information processing, I get a 2x2 design, and I've got 4 cells, right? So when I actually select subject to participate in my experimental design, I have to randomly allocate them into one of those 4 cells. The reason behind randomization is pretty straightforward. If you don't randomize, you might create cells and subjects, okay, who might not be matched, okay, for many other different variables. For example, if I randomly assign people to different conditions, in the end, they might average out for any other significant differences with respect to age, income, their background, education, right? And the idea is within a cell, okay, every participant would be random, and they should be able to complete the experiment, which is basically a survey administered to that cell in their unique way. So we also have the concept of IID, identical independent distribution. So you will realize when you actually run an experiment, you run them cell-wise, cell 1, cell 2, cell 3, cell 4. You invite participants to conduct the experiment in an online environment or in a paper and pencil environment, but you hold them in small groups. So each response from a participant is an IID, identical independent distribution, right? And the third step is careful observation of measurement. So when we are manipulating something, we have to be very confident that are we carefully manipulating it? Or if it's a quasi experiment, have we carefully measured it, right? Okay, have we measured our dependent variable correctly? Are they grounded in literature? Because without the theoretical lens, your experimental design will not carry much meaning, at least in the area of marketing and communication. So if you pay attention to that comment with asterisks, right? Now, point number 1 and point number 2 distinguishes experiments from other research strategies. In a survey, you're not manipulating something. You're just administering a whole bunch of variables to the respondent. In experiments, you're manipulating the independent variables. And you're also controlling for effect like extraneous variable, confound variable, or your randomization. There are other nuances applied to experimental design. We are going to talk them one by one. And this is experimental design explained in the simplest form. I have been learning this for 15, 16 years. The reviewers of my paper, they still throw me challenges, okay? So very intricate design. The more you work with it, the more you experience it, the more you learn, okay? So again, reinforcing a direct assessment of how one variable influences another. So the first variable, independent variable, is X, the dependent variable is Y. So why we insist? Because by engaging in experimental design, we can confidently say that X is causing Y, right? And we also have the concept of extraneous variables. We'll understand what extraneous variables. So when you are saying mood is causing a certain consumer behavior, how do you know it's mood? How do you know it's not the color? Or how do you know it's not other variable, okay? That's related to mood that might be causing that impact. So in order to understand extraneous variables, we have to read the literature, understand the theory that when I'm manipulating mood, what else I'm manipulating, right? So in order to come up with a clear experimental design, you have to control for experimental extraneous variables. By controlling means when you'll be analyzing the data, like you'll be running an ANOVA, MANOVA, or ANCOVA, you have to throw those extraneous variables in your model as control variables. Now, the next few slides is about a bunch of definitions. So the independent variable is also known as the cause, like as we know, it's a cause and effect. So independent variable can be manipulated. So if it's a state variable, it can be manipulated. For example, in the Journal of Advertising paper, theory says regulatory focus is a state variable, right? Meaning that you can experience regulatory focus. I can put you into a promotion focus, prevention focus. But the literature also says that regulatory focus can also be a disposition, meaning it's a trait variable. So if it's a state variable, I can manipulate that, okay, through a description. If it's a trait variable, I have to measure that, okay? For example, culture is a trait variable. You cannot manipulate culture, right? Because people are born into different countries and culture. So in that case, it becomes a quasi experiment. You just randomly allocate people, you know, from different culture to your experimental conditions, right? However, like I said, if there's another variable like mood, regulatory focus, right? You can manipulate that because of state variable. You have to manipulate that variable. Again, all manipulations, the definition of the construct has to be grounded in theory. Moving on, independent variable. Another way of addressing independent variable is predictor variable. So please remember, these are academic or research jargons which people use to define the independent variable. It's also known as the cause, also known as the predictor variable. An independent variable could be manipulated or it could be measured depending on the nature of the variable, whether the state variable or trait variable. Dependent variable is known as the effect because we are studying cause and effect. X is causing Y. Dependent variable, ideally, if you have studied the literature, if you understand the logic, underpinning logic, dependent variable should only vary in response to IV, meaning when you are tweaking or manipulating the IV, the independent variable, the dependent variable should have a resultant impact. That way, you are actually conducting an experiment. That's why both the independent variable and dependent variable have to be grounded in literature. You have to select them carefully so that you know they respond or they correspond to each other, right? The DV corresponds to IV and responds to any manipulation in the IV. Dependent variable, another way of describing the dependent variable is the criteria variable. It's also known as the criteria variable. Now, extraneous variable has to be controlled, okay? So what's an extraneous variable? So when you're manipulating the IV, any other variable, the third variable can also be manipulated. For example, if you are showing me a sad movie to manipulate my mood, okay? Because when you watch a sad movie, people get into a bad mood, okay? Or probably a negative mood, right? How do you know that is the resultant mood that's ultimately impacting my behavior? How do you know that When you get into a negative mood, you also become an analytical information processor, right? And that thing is not impacting my ultimate behavior. So please remember, extraneous variables have to be controlled for. So when you're manipulating your independent variable, if you doubt, and if the literature says that a third variable can also be manipulated, because you have just manipulated the key independent variable, you have to control for that variable, because that variable is known as an alternate explanation or a third variable. And this is where the real challenges lie. Whenever I send a paper based on experimental design, the reviewers can come and say, hey, Rajat, I agree that you have manipulated price framing, but how about information processing? Have you unknowingly manipulated information processing style? You're claiming you've got different price frames, but that could also be possible. Then I would counter that argument saying that, hey, look, I have thought about that. So I have actually incorporated the confounding variable, measured that, and when I analyze the data, I have control for that variable to rule out for an alternate explanation. So I'm going to take a pause here, and I've got a bunch of questions to reflect, and I'll give you the answer. Okay, but the key questions are: look at the JA paper. I'm going to bring up the JA paper. Think of the independent variable, dependent variable. Is there any confound variable? How do I manipulate them? And how do I know manipulation has worked? So I'm going to bring up the JA paper, but in the meantime, I can also take questions to Chetna.
Okay, we don't have any questions in the Q&A section here, but I would like to put up a question since we are talking about the surveys and the quasi-experimental design. So one thing that I wanted to ask is that, do all surveys qualify as experimental design? Because one of the conditions for an experimental design is the possibility of manipulation of independent variable. So, it could be just, I just want to measure, quantum of certain things, how they are, in, as a pattern or anything. So would all surveys be experimental design or some?
Right. So Chetna, the way to think about this is a survey is basically one study, okay, with one condition where you have all the independent and dependent variables thrown in, right? Mm-hmm. And you administer to your participants their answer or the reply all the independent and dependent variables. But experimental design, you can think of it like this. So if we have a 2x2 design, right? So let's say regulative focus and an information processing, right? So 2x2 design, that means you have 4 different conditions. Why these conditions are different? Because in one condition, you have got promotion focus and you've got imagery advertisement. That means people have been manipulated into promotion focus and they're looking at an ad which has an imagery element that generates images on their mind, right? So that's one condition. In that condition, there'd be a specific survey. That means people would reply a bunch of dependent variable and manipulation check questions, but their independent variables are very specific. Their independent variables have been manipulated for promotion focus and imagery. Now think about another condition. They will also again reply or respond to a survey, but in that condition, the independent variables have been manipulated to promotion focus and analytical. So that means condition 1 and condition 2 are different with regards to the independent variable. So they have slightly different surveys because the independent variables are different, but the dependent variables, which are the general responses, right? Whatever scales we use, will be exactly similar across 4 conditions. But for a survey, there is no manipulation of independent variables. So you just administer the independent variable and dependent variable in one questionnaire. For a 2x2 experiment, there'll be 4 different types of questionnaires, depending on how you cross one independent variable with the other independent variable.
Thank you. I think we have a few questions in our question bank today, right now. So I'm going to just read them out to you. The first question is from Kalpak Kulkarni, and it says that personality traits like Big 5 are the trait variables that can be used as a manipulation to group people for different stimuli. So can we only use state variables for manipulation, or we can use trait variables also?
So Kalpak, that's a very interesting question. So normally state variables could be manipulated, right? But trait variables are dispositional variables. So let's say by nature, I'm extrovert, right? Now, again, be careful. Please study the literature and the theory, what it says. If it's a purely dispositional trait variable, you cannot manipulate that. You can only measure that. So you can select people who have got extrovert nature. And then you can manipulate another independent variable, which could be state variable, right? So depending on whether state and trait, okay, you have different approaches. For a state variable, you can manipulate, okay? But for trait variable, you generally measure it. And you have a different way of testing your data. Probably you're going to use a median split or Pitcher and Hayes method, right? Because that variable is a trait variable. You create different levels of the trait variable, high or low. So somebody could be high on extrovert, low on extrovert, okay? But you cannot manipulate them. Like culture. So if you belong to a collectivist culture, you can manipulate that. You have to measure that, right? So I hope that answers the question.
The second one is actually asking you to repeat the confounding variables with an example. So maybe this question is from Smriti Shukla.
Okay. So let's say I have come up with a hypothesis that cigarette smoking causes cancer. That's my hypothesis. So my independent variable is cigarette smoking. My dependent variable is cancer, the likelihood of getting cancer, right? Now, well, of course, there's ethics. I can't ask people to go on, chain smoking situation, because that would be unethical. But however, let's say I observe people who are chain smoker versus non-chain smoker, or smoker versus non-smoker, right? And then I realize that people who smoke, they have higher likelihood to get cancer. So I come up with this conclusion that cigarette smoking causes cancer. I also stop there. Is it really causing cancer? How do you know that people who actually are chain smokers, they don't have any other variable that might explain that cancer effect? For example, they could have a genetic predisposition already to have cancer. Maybe they have cancer in the family. Maybe they belong to a socioeconomic status. They're low in socioeconomic status. They don't have high nutrition, and that's why they get cancer. So confound variable is an alternate explanation. It's a third variable. So when you're manipulating your independent variable, you could be unknowingly manipulating some other variable in that individual when that individual is responding. So it's your challenge to control for that alternate explanation or the third variable, which is also known as a confounding variable.
Thank you. The next question is from my senior colleague at Flame. Her name is Supriya. Marketing is holistic. Therefore, isolation of variables is not a reality. How does experimental design consider real-life elements impacting these variables?
Okay. Supriya, thank you for asking that. And thanks, Smriti also for asking that question. Now, if I ask you, Supriya, how about health sciences? How do you know your, Covishield? I think in India it's called Covishield. In Australia it's called AstraZeneca. How do you know? Health science is also pretty much holistic, right? Because body is sum of many parts. You need a body to perfectly balance with each other to work properly. Excuse me. So how do you know that in health sciences research can work? Because we have experimental design. Because someone has tested the effect of a vaccine with another placebo. So the treatment or the independent variable which has been manipulated is a real vaccine versus a placebo, right? And they have administered that in two groups. One group who have actually received the vaccine, another group who have received an alternate placebo. And then they have measured the impact, that how much antibodies was formed in the body, right? And based on that, they have concluded we have causal evidence that the vaccine actually works because it produces antibody, right? So in marketing, yes, you can think of marketing as holistic, but in marketing, we have got a whole bunch of phenomenon going on, okay? How do you know radio ad could be more effective than TV? How do you know in social media, TikTok could be more effective than Facebook, How do you know, one luxury brand could be better than another luxury brand? How do you know the color blue could be more effective than the color green? How do you know one type of pricing could be effective than the other? For example, let me explain this to you. So let's say you're selling butter in the market, butter, right? And in one condition, you call the butter 99% fat free, okay? In another condition, you call the butter 1% fat. They're exactly equivalent. So 99% fat free and 1% fat is exactly equivalent. But the underpinning psychology, when you call it 99% fat free and 1% fat, is very different. So it might actually influence the person's decision to choose a butter depending on how it is described or how it is framed. So yes, in marketing, we have real life implications like I discussed, but the challenge for us marketers and researchers is to break that down in terms of theory, independent variable and dependent variable, to come up with a causal explanation, to come up with an explanation that will prove, yes, I know the way you're describing 99% and 1% butter is having an impact.
Our next question is from Jitesh Dhoot, and he's asking that, is there any alternative to quasi-experiment design of research study?
Well, thank you, Jitesh, but it all depends on how you design and plan your research. And that's why I have been repeating and reinforcing a few times, we always need to get help from theory. How does theory guide us there? Because for marketing research and communication research and scientific evidence, okay, the first part is all about your argument, right? Like inductive. So you actually frame your hypothesis based on theory, external literature. So once you have phrased your hypothesis, then you go out and collect data and you see whether your hypothesis is supported. That's the deductive part, right? So combining both of them together, we create scientific knowledge, right? So for example, like I said, you really can't manipulate culture, right? So if your research is about culture and its effect on choice of brand, choice of a holiday destination, then there's no other alternative to a quasi-experimental design. So you have to kind of allocate people based on their culture, right? However, if it's based on age, you can, again, it's a quasi-experimental design. You have to take people from different age. So let's say I'm 45. You cannot manipulate me to be 25, right? I can't be manipulated to be 25, right? I'm 45. So hence it becomes a quasi-experimental design. But if you're trying to manipulate mood, it doesn't matter whether I'm 25 or 45. You can put me into a good mood. You can put a 25-year-old person also into a good mood, right? So that's a state variable that could be manipulated.
Smriti has another question, and this says, what is an exact difference between extraneous variables and confounding variables?
So extraneous variable, by and large, okay, they are the alternate explanation. So confounding variable could be a type of extraneous variable which specifically co-varies with your independent variable. For example, if you study the literature of regulatory focus, and it says, and the 10 papers, it says that when you manipulate regulatory focus, you also manipulate people's mood. Although your intention was not to manipulate mood, okay? Then mood becomes a confounding variable in the context of regulatory focus. So extraneous variable is more broad-based, but when you are looking at a specific independent variable and you study the literature, if the literature has mentioned prior that some other variable could also be manipulated when you're manipulating that independent variable, that becomes a confounding variable because that provides an alternate explanation that challenges your finding, that challenges your internal validity.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. I think, yeah, okay, we have one more question that just came in. Does just marketing research done by MR agencies differ from academic research in marketing?
Okay, there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference. So marketing research agencies, okay, they are more hands-on, practical-driven research. So their research could involve dashboards and distribution analysis, okay? A certain group of consumer could have high attitude, and that high attitude comes from their socioeconomic status, their lifestyle, so on and so forth. For academic research, it's scientifically grounded. I'm not saying that marketing research is not scientifically grounded. It's also scientifically grounded, but academic research is more rigorous in the sense that we actually study the literature. For example, if I'm doing research on mood, there's 50 years of psychology literature. I'll probably study the literature first and then understand what it involves to do research about mood. I'll give an example. So I did some consultation with Mercedes-Benz here in Gold Coast, right? Now they have a loyalty card. They have a loyalty card, okay? So the loyalty card gives them certain benefits. If you're a Mercedes-Benz driver, it gives you free cleaning of the car every quarter, free transportation to the airport in a Mercedes-Benz car, so on and so forth, right? Now the challenge is they wanted to develop an app, an application on your smartphone. Now Mercedes-Benz customers, at least in Australia, they belong to two different groups. So one group is middle-aged, like let's say people in 40s to 50s, and another group is significantly older, 60 plus, let's say 60 plus, okay? Now these two groups are very different in terms of their behavior, right? Because 60 plus, they could struggle with technology, 40 to 50 could be more comfortable with the technology. So I did a focus group. But before I did the focus group, I looked at the entire literature that how does people market app and branded app? So Mercedes-Benz is a huge brand. So an application from Mercedes would be a branded app. So how do people actually classify and look at branded app? And how do they study branded app? What is the existing knowledge about branded app? And what does it say about different segments? So based on that, I designed a questionnaire, right? And then I ran a focus group with 2 different groups, okay? So what I did was, although it was industry relevant research, I still grounded in solid academic theory.
The question was from Satish, actually. So thank you so much. This is the first round of questions we have. Thank you, people, for putting up those questions. And thank you, Dr. Roy, for addressing them. You may proceed with the talk.
Okay. Thank you. I'm happy with that. So guys, just to reinforce, my independent variables were regulatory focus and information processing. My dependent variables were a bunch, purchase intention, I think attitude towards the ad, message persuasiveness. Confound variables I published this paper in 2014. At that point of time, the literature did not prescribe any confound variables, so probably I have none. How did I manipulate the variable? Regulatory focus, let me explain that what it is about. It's about a state. It could also be a chronic disposition. For example, some people, they like to aim for positive things in life, that motivates them. Yet there's another group of people who like to avoid negative things in life, and that's what motivates them, right? It depends on so many factors, what kind of person you are, but partly depends on how you have been raised. For example, by nature, I'm prevention focused. I always like to avoid negative outcome. That motivates me. My wife, she always works towards positive outcomes. So you understand the end result could be the same. For example, 2 students, they can aim for A in their subject. One could be promotion focused. That means that person is very eager. He goes beyond what the professor asks him to study. And as a result, he gets A. A prevention focused person, they will be motivated to get an A because they want to avoid getting a B. Okay, so their goal is to avoid B and hence get an A. And their strategy could be very much risk averse. They'll listen to whatever advice the professor has. They'll come to class on time. They'll check everything the professor asks them to do. So you can understand there are 2 different pathways to get an A or to achieve an outcome. But the strategy to getting similar outcome could be different based on whether you're promotion or prevention focus. So I manipulated promotion prevention focus by asking them to write an essay. I gave them the definition of promotion prevention focus, and I asked them, can you actually mention 3 things while growing up where you are promotion focused, right? Similar for prevention focus, can you mention 3 things in your life while growing up, how you are raised as prevention focus? And after manipulating that, I also have to ensure that my manipulation has worked, okay? So I engage something like a question, which is also a dependent variable, but this dependent variable is used to check whether my manipulation has worked, and hence it's known as a manipulation check. So after people did the promotion focus and prevention focus manipulation, I gave them a question based on the write-up or based on the paragraph that you wrote. Currently, you are tempted to, on the one hand of the scale, I say take the world trip. On the other hand of the scale, I say pay off my student loan, something like that, right? So if my manipulation has worked, I did my research with students. People who have been manipulated into prevention focus, they should show more risk averse and responsible behavior. So they should lean towards paying off my student loan. People who have been manipulated into promotion focus, they should be more eager. They should check probably, I'm not saying 100 out of 100 people will check that, but majority of them, they should check that, hey, I would like to go on a world trip. So that manipulation check will actually provide evidence whether my manipulation has worked. So I engage manipulation check for my Journal of Advertising paper. Okay. Now, when you're talking about experimental design, the basic underlying theme is causality, right? Yeah, X causing Y. Okay. So now, how do we establish causality? They're preconditions. Okay. To establish causality, you have to pay attention to all those things. So manipulation of one or more IV is a necessary condition. So I manipulated regulatory focus. So you need to manipulate. Okay. But it's for the quasi experiment, you can also measure. Okay. We infer that X causes Y if the following holds true. So X precedes Y, meaning X has to come ahead in time before Y happens. For example, if your prediction is cigarette smoking causes cancer, the person has to smoke first, then cancer will follow. It's not the other way around. So my theory was regulatory focus and information processing will influence attitude towards the product. And hence I manipulated regulatory focus and presented them with different ads for information manipulation. And then I measured the dependent variable, which is attitude towards the ad, purchase intention. The next condition, sufficiency of X, Whenever X is present, Y occurs. They could be covariant. If X increases, Y increases, X goes down, Y goes down. And there's a necessity condition that X must be present for Y to occur. And hence, again, theory is important. What does theory say? Will X, if X is present, if we manipulate X, will I get the desired impact on Y? Okay. And the last condition, like I said, extraneous variable, confounding variable, alternate explanation has to be ruled out. So if you kind of check all these things, you can say with confidence that I have provided evidence for causality. You can say with confidence, hey, my vaccine is going to work in real life because I have causal evidence. And experimental design is the best research method for causality. Okay. Well, correlational evidence. Okay, so if X increases and Y increases, okay, X decreases, Y decreases, you may not be able to infer causality, right? Okay. So what could happen is you can have correlational evidence. Okay. For example, I'll share another example from my own research experience. So we collected data from retail industry in Australia during COVID lockdown period, which happened last year, I think between April, May, June, something like that, 3 months or something like that. Okay. And we saw that there is a significant change in shopping behavior from morning to afternoon. Meaning when people are going in the afternoon, well, of course, there was lockdown, but things were open for essential items. So you can still go grocery shopping, right? So when you go from morning to afternoon / evening, your composition of shopping basket changes. People were buying more, safety items, meaning they're buying, remember this COVID time, people want to look after their health, right? So people were buying more safety items like health supplements, they're even buying toilet paper, hand sanitizer, significantly more in the afternoon compared to morning. So that's the interesting thing. So we found that from a database of, let's say, 1 million of Australian consumers, but that evidence is only correlational. Now, my theory was I can safely predict that time of the day, whether morning versus afternoon and evening, is an independent variable. Okay, that's causing the change in behavior. But how can I alternately explain it in a different way? Is it only time of the day, or is it time of the day crossed with something else? Then I started reading the literature on time of the day, right? I also started reading literature about mortality settings. We thought I'm doing some work on mortality settings. And my theory was, and my understanding was based on the literature, sorry, but depending on the time of the day and whether thoughts of death is prominent on your mind, okay? Sometimes thoughts of death become prominent on our mind. Sometimes we do not think about death actively, right? So my theory was whether it's morning versus afternoon and evening, the thoughts of death would emerge differently on your mind. In the morning, when you get up, think about this. It also makes intuitive sense. You do not think about death actively because you have the whole day to get on with. You think about hundreds of things that you do in the day. But as the day progresses, okay, thoughts of death become more significant. So I had the correlational evidence about time of the day and shopping behavior. Then I ran 2 experiments and I provided causal evidence that when you cross time of the day with mortality salience, okay, that's actually motivating people to choose different type of product. So in the morning, people are less likely to choose product to keep them safe. But in the afternoon and evening, they're more likely to choose product that's going to keep them safe. So what I'm saying, correlational evidence by itself is not causal evidence. We need to supplement correlational evidence with causal evidence. In the next few slides, we'll talk about correlational evidence. Just think of the first picture. So where you have Age of Miss America in blue, and you have murders by steam, hot vapors, and hot objects in brown. So can you say, that Age of Miss America is causing more murders, or the other way around, murders by steam, hot vapors, and hot objects is causing more people to go for Miss America, or decreasing the age of Miss America? I don't know, because that sounds absurd. It doesn't have any meaning, right? It doesn't make any rational sense, although the correlation is pretty high, 0.87. And these examples are chosen with purpose because I wanted to demonstrate they're so disparate things, okay? It doesn't make sense to predict that one is causing the other. Think about the other thing. Non-commercial, other picture, non-commercial space launches, okay? How many spacecraft has been launched by US is highly correlated with number of kids killed by their parents. So can you say that since US is launching more spacecraft, it's causing more parents to kill their children? Or the other way around, Since parents are killing their children more, US is launching more spacecraft. As you can see, it doesn't make any sense. It's absurd. But from a correlational point of view, these two phenomena are highly correlated, right? So this is not causal evidence. This is just correlational evidence. Okay. So guys, what are the advantages of experimental design? There are a few advantages. You can precisely control your independent variable. Remember, I talked about chemistry, how you did titration. You actually added liquid A to liquid B. And towards the end, your teacher told you, hey, control for the liquid A and let it go drop-wise. So you add one drop, be careful, add another drop, and you wait for that point when the color changes. Okay. In a psychological domain, we are actually manipulating the independent variable. It's like controlling liquid A, right? And you're watching an impact on the dependent variable, which is the liquid in the beaker, whose color is changing, right? So you can precisely control, okay? You can draw causal conclusions, right? Well, of course, you have to understand research methods, although they have advantages, they also come up with a bunch of disadvantages. For example, to rule out for alternate explanation, you have to conduct an experiment in a tight setting. For example, if you're standing in the middle of a shopping mall and conducting an experiment, people will say, hey, that doesn't look like a pure experiment, because people could be distracted by so many other things, right? That means your setting is artificial. You invite a group of people to come into your lab, you ask them to sit on different computer, and you ask them to complete their survey, in each condition, okay? So it's got an artificial setting, although in recent time, you have something called field experiment, okay? So what is field experiment? Let's say if I have a hypothesis that blue colored laptop will sell more than the red color laptop, you can set up the blue color and red color laptop in a retail setting, and as consumers walk in, you can watch their behavior, whether they're going for the blue color or red color, right? So that's a naturalistic setting. Naturalistic setting means that people are not aware that independent variable has been manipulated. It's part of your natural setting, right? It's part of the shop where you're going to buy a computer. But for real experiment, okay, you have to have some degree of artificialness in your experiment, okay? Experiment also means intrusiveness is typically high. Intrusiveness means when you're manipulating your independent variable, like I explained, I asked my people to write a paragraph about regulatory focus, promotion and prevention focus. That's highly intrusive, right? That's kind of artificial. That's not naturalistic, right? Now, you also cannot measure complex behavior. Someone mentioned that marketing is holistic. You're right, because the whole idea about research is to make it as simple as possible. If I come up with a research model and throw in hundreds of variables, something will be significant, but that's not the idea. We call parsimony. Parsimony is a way to say that, well, do we have a simplistic design to prove our theory? And that simplistic design, choice of independent and dependent variable, comes from theory, okay? So complex behaviors could be difficult to measure. This is how experimental designs are kind of, denoted, right? So as you can see, in the first case, we have O1, okay? That's before the treatment is administered. So what's the treatment? The treatment could be a powder or a shake for muscle, right? So T is the treatment, O2 is the post measure. So O1 is the pre-measure, O2 is the post measure. So in the first condition, you have two groups of people, O1 and you've got one group of people. You're actually administering the muscle whatever, protein shake or muscle shake or whatever, and you're measuring the effect in condition O2. In the second one, O3 and O4, you have a placebo. That's a control condition or benchmark. In that group of people, which is a separate group of people compared to O1, in O3, you're administering them a placebo, a powder, which is not supposed to enhance their muscle. And then when you find some effect in O1 versus O2, you're going to compare that effect across O3 versus O4. Then you can safely conclude that compared to my benchmark or control condition, my treatment or my muscle powder or my protein shake actually works. It helps people to build muscle. So this is actually based on a very simple experimental design, true experimental design. But please remember, at the heart of it, okay, you have randomization. We spoke about randomization. For example, in O1 group, if you just throw in people who are more likely to do exercise, drink protein shake, and in O3 condition, you select people who don't do any exercise, that's what it doesn't rule out for alternate explanation. Hence, you have to randomly allocate people into O1 and O3, meaning people who exercise, who don't exercise, who would likely to take protein shake, who are not likely to take protein shake. That way, you're averaging out the group of people in O1 and group of people on O3. Okay, now we have certain jargons in experiment. What is a between subject factor? What is the within subject factor? A between subject factor is a factor which has got different levels. For example, for my research, general advertising, I had regulatory focus, and under regulatory focus, I had 2 levels: promotion focus, prevention focus. So when I have different groups of people, randomly allocated to the promotion focus, and another group of people randomly allocated to prevention focus, then my promotion focus variable becomes between subject. So let's say I allocate 50 people to promotion focus and another 50 people, they're different people, to prevention focus at between subject. However, let's imagine my second factor. My second factor from general advertising is type of advertisement, imagery and analytical. So what I can do, I can have a between subject. That means I can have 50 people who will actually see the imagery advertisement. I can have another 50 people who can actually see the analytical advertisement, right? That will be between subject. However, if I choose that same group of 50 people observes or sees the imagery first, followed by analytical, or analytical first followed by the imagery advertisement, that is the same 50 group of people, they actually see both the ads. Then in that case, my information processing for advertisement becomes a within subject. That means same group of people, they're experiencing 2 levels of the independent variable, right? Okay. So that's to reinforce that. So research design in which each subject experiences one of the conditions of the experiment. That's a between subject. Within subject, also known as repeated measures. You can also have a mixed design. So you can have one variable as between subject. You can have another variable as within subject. That's called a mixed or split plot design, right? Within subject, the same subject experiences all the conditions of the experiment or all the levels of independent variable, right? Now, there are advantages and disadvantages. My supervisor once told me, when you actually run an experiment, to keep it clean, okay, keep it between subjects. That means have different people allocated to different cells. That means if I have 4 cells, okay, for my 2x2 design, I'll have 200 people. However, the advantage within subjects is if I have a small sample size, I can actually do the same job with half the sample size. For example, for within subjects, if I need 50, 50, 100 people for 2 different conditions, but instead of running a between subject, I run a within subject. That means I am just asking 50 people to watch 2 different versions of the ad. Within subject, the problem is there could be carryover effect. How do you know that? The way you present one ad over the other can influence the decision, okay? Well, of course, you can counterbalance. You can present ad A before ad B. Then again, for half of the subject, you can present ad B followed by ad A. But there could be traces, okay, that people can carry over from the previous ad to the next ad, okay? So that is probably kind of a little bit murky because that's going to, that's not a very clean design. That's what I want to say. So ideally, when you're running experimental design, please try and consider between subject design. This is from a picture point of view. You can clearly see that in terms of factorial design, we have one independent variable called A. A has 2 different levels, A1 and A2. We have the second independent variable called B. It has got 3 levels, B1 and B2, B3. I've given an example. For me, A is scarcity appeal. So A1 is demand scarcity, A2 is supply scarcity, B is envy, the type of envy, and there are 3 levels: benign envy, malicious envy, and a control condition, no envy. Now, depending on how I cross them, it could be a between subject or mixed subject, or within subject. For example, in the first condition, if I cross A1, A2 into with B1, B2, B3, I've got 6 different cells, okay, 2 by 3. In that case, if I use 50 people in each cell, okay, so A1, B1, 50 people, A1, B2, 50 people, A1, B3, 50 people, A2, B1, 50 people. That means I have 6 cells and I've got 300 subjects, a pure between subject. However, if I decide that for A1, A2, I will have 100 people each, A1 100, A2 100. However, for 100 A1 people, I'll present all the 3 conditions, B1, B2, B3. That means my A1 factor, my A factor is between subject, my B factor is within subject. That becomes a mixed design, right? Now, it's all guided by theory. It's all guided by whether you can manipulate A1, B1. So all those things still holds. But this is just different type of designs I'm going to explain. I'm going to take a pause and take any questions that comes through. I can see there's some questions coming through. I'll take a pause here.
Sure. We do have some questions. I'd like to start with a question that has been put by Dr. Menon, and it says that what would you say is a good sample size for between subject designs?
Okay, so I know from recent experience that people are, not long back, 10 years back, 12 years back, people would have, 40 people in each cell. They would be happy. But recently, I've seen a trend that people are asking for large sample size. So in the last paper that I received, the feedback was have at least 100 people or 100 respondents in each condition. So if it's a 3x2 design, it's got 6 cells. Their expectation is to have 600 people participating in that experiment.
Okay, so there is no formula or anything as such. There's no thumb.
No, there is. You can calculate statistical power.
Okay.
So the idea is to have enough statistical power. There are equations. If they calculate statistical power, there are lots of equations and algorithms. You can quickly check your sample size and what kind of statistical power you actually, aiming for.
And
but
there is
from experience, yeah.
Sure, go ahead, sir. You were saying from experience.
Oh, from experience, I'm saying roughly it could be in the nature or in the size of anything between 70 to 100. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. The next question is, while causality can reasonably be established for the sample in experimental studies, can it be generalized for the population?
That's a really interesting question, because experimental design has certain degree of artificialness, right? Because we're controlling for so many other extraneous variables. So we can actually conclude generalizability. So the question means that can we generalize the results? Okay, so that's known as generalizability, external validity. So we can generalize the results if we can show that our study in the context of marketing has worked for one product, let's say cars, has worked for another product, let's say smartphone, has worked for another product category, let's say services, right? Then we can conclude that yes, we have replicated the experiment with similar results for multiple product category, and hence it could be generalizable. But you also leave a caveat. You say that, hey, future research can test our theory on additional products and services. Because if you think about it, most of the research that comes today is tested in US, okay, or developed country or Western country. How do you know it's going to work in India? It works because it's still human behavior. It's still human behavior. It works, okay? But the unfortunate thing in marketing and communication is if you just replicate a study, it might not get published. You have to create additional insights and additional knowledge. That's the key thing.
So extending to this question, and from what you were talking about, the sample size, would the size of the sample also help in generalization? And of course, for the same product, you're testing the theory or testing your findings in different markets, different scenarios. Would that also help in generalization?
Yes. Not the size of the sample here. Size of the sample will give you enough statistical power. But if you have cross-cultural sample, so let's say I do a test in India, I do another test in the US, and I do a third test in Australia, and I select same product category. But based on my results, I find the results are very similar, right? Then I can say, hey, it's generalizable across different countries and culture. So what I was mentioning previously was generalizable across different products. Please understand, it's not easy to go to US and collect data. It's not easy to come to Australia and collect data, right? So in most of the time, we end up with convenience samples. We collect data from our own university, from our own country, right? In that case, you can show generalizability by using different product categories from one study to another. But if you have the resources, if you can collect data from multiple countries, that could also enhance your generalizability.
Sure. Thank you. I think we are done with the questions as of now, so you may resume.
Okay, beautiful. So guys, we again revisit our concept of quasi experiment. So if you read that chunk of information there, it's very similar to experiment, but the IV cannot be randomly assigned. You cannot randomly assign me to the American culture, because at the core, I still remain Indian, and that's how I've been raised, culturally conditioned, right? So what you do is probably you can allocate subject based on their background, or if it's a disposition or trade variable, you can actually measure that, okay? For example, regulatory focus that I mentioned is a state variable. You can put people in different regulatory focus, right? However, it's also a trade variable, because people sometimes, they come up with strong inherent tendency to be prevention focused or promotion focused. Think about a variable called price consciousness. Okay, price consciousness is a trait which tells that some people enjoy, shopping around, looking around for the most competitive prices, right? Probably you cannot manipulate that. It's not a state. It's an inherent predisposition. It's a strong tendency for some people to look for competitive prices. Think of another example called need for uniqueness. Some people have a strong need to stand out. For example, have you seen people actually use monograms or initials on their mobile phone, or initials, they print the initials on Louis Vuitton handbag, because hundreds of people buy Louis Vuitton handbag. How can you stand out? You can stand out if I have my monograms RR Rajat Roy in golden letters on my Louis Vuitton handbag. That means I have actually catered to my need for uniqueness, right? So depending on whether it's a state or trait variable, yours could be a pure experiment or quasi experiment. So I gave you the examples. Okay, so comment on the design. I'll probably comment on my design. It's a 2x2 design. So my first independent variable is promotion focus, got 2 levels, regulatory focus, got 2 levels, promotion prevention. My second independent variable is information processing, I've got 2 levels, imagery and analytical. Is this a quasi experiment? No, it's not a quasi experiment because I manipulated both my independent variables because they're more like state variables. I can manipulate them. So how do I ensure causality? Because I first manipulated my regulatory focus, then I have manipulated my imagery processing, then I've measured. Then I measured my dependent variables, attitude towards ad, purchase intention. So if you remember, regulatory focus, the theory predicts it can influence the information processing, and combinedly they can influence your perceptions about advertisement, your product perceptions, your brand attitude, right? So theoretically, I've ensured that my X variable and Y variable have been chosen. My X variable comes ahead of time compared to my Y variable. I've also ensured that I have used the correct manipulation. I've used the right construct. I've grounded them in theory. And I have got consistent evidence because I've conducted 2 different studies with 2 different products. I've got consistent evidence. What I'm saying could be empirically supported, right? And based on my experimental design, I could provide evidence for causality, right? Okay. Now, the inference that you're drawing from your experimental design could be challenged, right? And those are the threats to valid inference making. So Campbell and Stanley, which is a classic paper, seminal paper, there are 4 categories of threats to draw valid conclusion about the effects of an IV, right? First is statistical conclusion validity, right? Now you may have random error. That random error may come from incorrect choice of statistical procedure. The random error may come from a skewed distribution of dependent variable. The random error may come from because you have not correctly followed the procedure for experimental design. The random error may come from how you administer the experiment, right? The next thing is internal validity. So internal validity, this phrase typically means that whether you provided enough evidence that X is causing Y, that IV is causing the variation in DV. If I have high level of smoking, that is causing cancer, that internal validity. Construct validity means, okay, that whether your construct, what's a construct? It's a physical, it's a psychological variable. For example, regulatory focus is a construct, mood is a construct, right? Price conscious is a construct. These are psychological variables which are grounded in theory, which could be manipulated, which could be measured. So for construct validity, I have to ensure that I have followed the literature in defining the construct, in manipulating the construct, in measuring the construct. Otherwise, my construct validity could be challenged. And external validity, I'm very glad people already started asking questions about that, whether whatever my findings are could be generalizable. Can I apply it across a different population? If I'm doing my study in India, does it apply to Australia? Does it apply to US? Or if I'm using a product category like mobile phone, does it apply to another product category like cars or pizza or services like the hotel industry, right? So that's external validity. Please remember, this is the nature of research. If you're trying to maximize internal validity because you're trying to provide causal evidence, there will be some level of sacrifice for external validity, okay? But when you're administering a survey is pretty much high on external validity, right? Because you can, you don't have to manipulate anything. You can run in multiple places, and it can provide a higher degree of external validity. But a survey, because it's a correlational design, it actually lacks, internal validity. So what I'm saying is no design is perfect. So if you are into manipulating variable, studying causality, providing causal evidence, choose, experimental design, okay? But please know that you're providing evidence for internal validity or causality, but at the cost of external validity. However, if you're clever enough, you can engage multiple methods. You can use a survey followed by experiment. I have done that. Remember how I was explaining compared to morning, people behave differently in the afternoon. So I did that based on correlational design. Okay, then I went back to experiment to provide causality. Within experiment, you can run pure lab experiment, laboratory-based experiment. So you can bring people into a room, you can administer your manipulation in small groups, or you can do field experiment. You can go to a shop in a retail setting and you can do an experiment. So if you combine lab experiment with a field experiment, you are maximizing both. You're maximizing internal validity from the lab experiment. You're also trying to enhance external validity through your field experiment. I work in an area called pay what you want. The basic idea is you can go to a shop, take a 3-course meal and pay any amount of money. So for me, one of the challenges, although I run lab experiments, people ask me, will it work in real life? Can actually people go to a restaurant, eat something and pay nothing? I said, yes, because I've also conducted field experiments, right? Okay. Now, there are some approaches. We talked about randomization, allocate people randomly to the experimental condition, okay? Now, you can have a single blind procedure. That means subjects, they should not be aware of the treatment. So you really cannot tell them, you cannot go to the room and tell them, hey, this is a study about how regulatory focus, influences your advertisement and your brand choice. You cannot tell them, okay? So you have to come up with, some excuses, okay? Some kind of, some kind of information to make them believe that the survey or the experiment is about something else. For regulatory focus, I said, hey, this part of the study is about how people lead on their everyday life. I never told them it's about regulatory focus, right? The second part of study where I administered the ads, I told them this part of study is about how people, study advertisements in marketing and in their daily life, right? So it means that subjects should not be able to guess the real nature of your study, the real relationship between independent and dependent variable, because if they can guess, they can provide biased information. So in my question, I always say there are no right or wrong answer, okay? We are only interested in your truthful responses, okay? That means, it also means that ethically, you're misleading them. Now that ethics comes into picture, when the experiment is done, you have to debrief them. You have to tell them, thank you for participating in my experiment. This was the real objective. Then you can reveal, okay, what was the real objective about your experiment, yeah, for your experiment. So you have to debrief them. The second thing is demand characteristics, okay? Now demand characteristics, if you ask, people certain questions which are leading, they'll give you leading answers, okay? For example, if you ask them, do you think charity is good? 99 out of 100 people will say yes. That means you have not phrased your question correctly, right? So you have to rule out all the demand characteristics, okay? Because people will be giving you biased or misleading answer. For example, if you hire beautiful people, okay, beautiful men and beautiful women to administer the experiment on the opposite gender, people would be, people would try to oblige, okay, because the looks can actually influence their decision. They'll try to give them biased answer. So please rule out for demand characteristics, okay? You can also use a double blind procedure, meaning sometime when the experimenter runs the experiment, I'll just take a bit of water. When the experimenter runs the experiment, that person can also, unconsciously, okay, influence the participant. For example, if I'm a lecturer and if I'm trying to collect some data from my class, okay, my class would be unconsciously trying to please me. They're trying to guess, hey, Rajat is doing an experiment, he's my teacher. If I give him good answers, he'll give us good marks, right? That means it's also kind of demand, characteristic, right? In order to rule that out, you have a double blind procedure, meaning the subjects do not know what the experiment is about. Even the people or the researchers who run the experiment, administer the experiment, they also know what's the real objective behind the experiment. And that's what probably led to our findings about COVID, right? People do not know. Even the people who are actually administering the vaccine, they do not know whether it's a real vaccine or it's a placebo, right? That's the ideal way of doing research, okay? So that's how you should run an experiment. And like I said, in experiment, you actually have a certain level of deception. You do not want them to guess your hypothesis. You do not want them to know what you're really studying. So there is deception, but you have this responsibility to debrief them after people have completed the experiment, right? Okay, so this is something about ethics. Different country, different university, they follow national standards. In Australia, we follow national standards, but actually these are guided by, societies and institutions like American Psychological Association. At Bond University, we have ethics committee called BUREC, B-U-H-R-E-C. So every researcher, my HDR student, myself, we have to run our questionnaires by the BUREC. BUREC actually gives us feedback, change this, change that, clarify this, clarify that. But the basic idea is you cannot cause harm to the participants. You cannot cause harm to the participant. And that harm could be psychological harm. So after taking part in the experiment, if someone feels distressed or depressed, okay, that's a no. So hence, ethical clearance is important. I'm sure you have got your own ethics mechanism at Flame University, but please remember all subjects need to be treated ethically. They need to be treated with respect, and you should work in accordance with the ethics of your university. So guys, I have adopted the proper methodology to rule out this statistical, validity. I have chosen the independent variable correctly, constructor based on theory, right? My generalizability is certain degree restricted because I collected the data in Australia, but that's one of my limitations, right? And I've taken ethics approval. Guys, once you get the experimental data, you have to code it. Remember, in my data, I have 2 by 2, that is 4 conditions. I've coded the data: condition 1, promotion imagery; condition 2, promotion analytical; condition 3, prevention imagery; condition 4, prevention analytical, right? Then it needs to be cleaned a bit because there could be, straight line answers, people couldn't be bothered, okay? And then you actually engage the appropriate method, meaning you can engage ANOVA, MANOVA. If you have control variables, you run ANCOVA, depending on what was your design between subjects or mixed design. Your choice of methodology will be different. In recent time, Hayes, Preacher and Hayes has become really popular. For any paper that you send to Marketing Communication Journal, they'll ask you that, hey, have you run Preacher and Hayes? So your analysis of data has to follow the design, the experimental design. These are some of the books that I recommend. This is just a basic, nuts and bolts kind of, seminar, but you can always email me. You can read more. When you read the papers, now that you've been sensitized to independent variables, please look out for all those things, especially when you're reading a journal paper that has been grounded in experimental design. So I think that's pretty much it from my side.
I think, Dr. Preeta, you want to say something? Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to tell you, Rajat, that you brought up ethics and how we treat it. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about how we do it at Flame. So we do have a committee here, the Independent Research IRB, which is the ethics board, and I'm part of that too. And all of us are city trained. So we have the city training that we take up, and any research project that is conducted by our faculty or students has to go through the IRB. And we have various levels of approvals, whether it's expedited or whether we do a full review or we do a half, semi-review, depending on what the case-to-case basis. So even when our students who are first-time researchers have a project in mind, we sensitize them to this. We take them through a masterclass, and then we get them to go through the process at least.
Absolutely. Beautifully explained. Thank you, Preeta. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. We have a few more questions. So if I may go ahead and ask them.
Sure, Chetna, please.
So there's one question from Monica Mandal, and she says that, let's say we want to study how anxiety varies across age groups. We recruit 2 age groups, 18 to 44 and 44 to 80. Now, will the age groups be considered as different conditions or independent variables?
Yes, if your theory says that based on the age group, something is going to happen. So that means age group comes first and then something is going to happen, whatever that something may be, right? Then yes, you're right. You've got 2 conditions for the age group, but how do you choose that condition should be guided by theory? Why 18 to 44 versus 45 to 60? What I'm saying is that choice of different levels of age group should be grounded in literature. So you have to study the literature and see whether that comparison is meaningful.
The next question is from Satish. He says, what is generalizability, external validity of student samples? How can implications of a study for management practice is inferred from results of a study conducting using student samples?
Okay. So student sample, when I study marketing and consumer behavior, students are consumers, right? Because they buy product, they lead on everyday life, right? But yes, they have limited generalizability, but you get around that by choosing your product cleverly. So if you're choosing smartphone as your product, okay, so you can clearly say that students use smartphone. They know how to choose a smartphone. They bought a smartphone, right? So it makes sense. If you use a restaurant, dinner, that makes sense. They go out to dine. But if you're using a super expensive restaurant where people, only the high income bracket they can afford, then it doesn't make sense. So your choice of product category can also justify your, student sample. For example, I do research and pay what you want. Like the strategy, you can eat a dinner and pay anything. Students are perfect consumers for that because they live on a budget, right? So I always justify that this is a perfect strategy for people who live on a small budget, okay? So yes, you can justify because students are consumers, right? Marketing journals, top-end marketing journals, Journal of Consumer Research, Marketing Research, right? They always accept student samples because your focus is theory creation. But if the reviewers come back and challenge that, hey, we need more in terms of generalizability, then you have to conduct another piece of study or replicate the study with a general sample, age between 18 to 60 years old.
Thank you. Our next question is from our Associate Dean, Professor Sajid Narayan. How to handle single blind procedure debriefing to keep it single blind for the next set of respondents, as respondents will share it with others in the lab panel. While in chemistry, okay, I hope there are two questions here. I'll just read both of them. While in chemistry, the independent variable is affecting a material, in marketing experiments, the independent variable is affecting human beings who are much more like a system. So would it not be very difficult to remove confounding fully or study all confounding variables?
Okay. No, thank you, Professor Narayan. I haven't seen you, I haven't met you, but I believe you're a great person. What I hear from Preetha, you're very dynamic, very capable. So thank you for this opportunity. I really like the choice of questions. Okay, you're right. Chemistry could not be compared to marketing. So that was to explain the concept behind experimentation. In marketing, we deal with psychological variables. And this is the thing I always try and insist that we should always go back on theory. You're right. There could be hundreds of things going on at the same time because there is consumer behavior theory which says that our human mind is like a black box. We can roughly guess what's going on because there is input and there is output. We do not know what happens in the intervening time within our brain. But we have psychological research, established over 100 years, yeah, where we tweak something, manipulate the independent variable, and study the impact. And based on the theory and the underpinning logic, we are saying X causing Y. So I will again say that the biggest help we have is from literature, which independent variable, which dependent variable, and what confound we can choose. Otherwise, our study will not be parsimonious. It will become overly complicated. Because if we try to throw in too many things, we will not get anywhere. So that's why we try to kind of create a simplistic design, only focusing on what we are trying to study. So that's my response to question 2. And Chetna, I'm getting old, I've forgotten question 1. So if you just briefly mention what is question 1, please.
Yeah. How to handle single blind procedure debriefing to keep it single blind for the next set of respondents as they will share with others.
Okay. So for example, let's say, single blind, I'm trying to compare Australian culture and Indian culture, right? And I'm trying to study the choice of brands as DV, right? So let's say in Australia, we have Indian students. I invite a group of students and I ask them about their choice of brand because I cannot manipulate this variable. Similarly, I ask Australian about their choice of brand and I compare between these two groups, right? It's a one variable, okay, culture, but the two different levels, Australia and India. And single blind meaning that the person who's administering, okay, person who's administering the test, okay, the researcher, probably he doesn't know what I'm trying to find. He'll think that I'm doing some research in different culture, but he doesn't know the true hypothesis, right? Single blind. So yes, the trick lies in training my experimental, research assistants. So I'll tell them that not to talk even with another administrator. Okay. I will also counterbalance. So let's say if I use experimenter A to administer the test for Indians and experimenter B for Australians, I'll swap that around, right? And I'll probably separate that in time. So I'll probably separate that in time. I'll probably, do one experiment today in the morning, another experiment in the late evening or afternoon, so that they could be separated and people don't talk to each other, right? So ideally, you're right, because people should not be able to guess our hypothesis, but like you rightly pointed out, it sometimes could be difficult to control, right? Or maybe I can put in a word that is an experiment. You should not be talking to other, because we have other people who would be conducting the same study. It's something like, if you run two different tests at the same test at two different times, students who took the test earlier, they can talk to people, who will take the test later, right? Well, there are challenges. There are challenges from a practical standpoint. Yeah.
The next question is from Kalpa Kulkarni. It goes like, from editors or reviewers' perspective, how papers with Quasi experiments are evaluated, what ideas authors must follow or avoid while conducting or reporting such studies?
So in my opinion, in my humble opinion, in my limited experience, a paper gets accepted for its unique proposition, the idea it pitches. Okay, nothing else. The rest is you provide support for your idea, right? So whether you do an experiment, quasi experiment, what variable you choose will be guided by theory. But please remember, when you send a paper, you have to reinforce that this is something unique. This is my theoretical contribution. This is something which addresses current theoretical gaps. And only for that reason, people accept paper in top-tier journals. The rest is methodology. But the idea has to be solid. That's what I'm saying.
I have a follow-up question from Professor Sajid here. And he thanks you for the answers and says that, can you also share your expert views on studying mediation, maybe using Hayes test in experimental research?
Mediation using what test?
Hayes test, H-A-Y-E.
Oh, Hayes, okay. So Hayes test is very convenient. So Pritchard and Hayes are two statisticians and they've written a bunch of papers, but what they've done, they've written macro codes. So there is information on the public source, how you can incorporate that macro codes into your SPSS. So the moment you successfully incorporate that macro code into your SPSS, it will create a tab under Analyze Regression. So it's pretty much simple. The theory is simple. You still have, so once you have that macro code, there are boxes like SPSS. You select your independent variable, you select your mediating variable, you select your dependent variable, and all you have to click is Analyze. And then you have to interpret the results, okay? The basic idea is still the same, but what Pritchard and Hayes does, it bootstraps, especially to increase statistical power. Sometimes we may have small sample size, 200, 300 people. It gives additional power by bootstrapping. But what's happening is there was a very tried and established method called Barron and Kinney for testing mediation. So people have of late preferred Pritchard and Hayes to analyze your mediation. And Pritchard and Hayes in the paper, they've come up with 50, 60 different models. So based on your theory, you study which model would be applicable for you. For example, you can study multiple mediators. Yeah. So X influencing Y, but you've got multiple mediators, Z1, Z2, Z3, Z4, right? Yeah. Or you can study moderated mediation for those multiple mediators. So what Pritchard and Hayes has done, they've enabled us to study complicated models. They've given us the macro code. It's all about downloading the code and using those click, click, click to do the analysis and interpret the results.
Thank you. I think we have overshot by 5 minutes, but I still have one question which I would request you to please take.
Sure.
So in this new area of neuromarketing and consumer neuroscience, we see a lot of emerging trends coming up. And of course, they are trying to unearth that, that black hole thing, which the mind just spoke about. So, but one thing that it says is that it is still very limited in terms of use, employment of, these measures, these techniques, especially even in the market research, leave alone the research that we do in academics. So, how do you see it growing? How would it reach to us, the researchers, and the scope for it? How's it in Australia, maybe, if you could tell us?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, Chetna. Pritha used to manage a behavior lab at Symbiosis, right? So she did eye tracking. So these are different tools, okay? You can hook up a person to electrodes, study their heartbeat, study their skin conductance, study their eye movement, right? But basically what you're trying to do, you're still trying to provide evidence for your theory and hypothesis, right? So what I'm saying is that these tools could be sophisticated, but these tools could be highly intrusive. The moment you hook up a person to electrodes and measurement devices, that person can get nervous. His heartbeat can go up, his skin conductance can change, right? So what I'm saying, you use a triangulation method. So you use an experimental design, a lab experiment, you use maybe a naturalistic field experiment, and then you can use an eye tracking study or a neuroimaging study, right? So a neuroimaging study by itself might not provide the complete evidence for your hypothesis and your research theory, right? So you need multiple evidences. So for example, I'm trying to engage with someone from UK, and he actually does algorithm. He's from the computer science department about facial plotting. So you plot your face and you can predict people's emotions. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm depressed, right? But his contribution is important. But if I want to look at how thin women in advertising has an impact on young women, right, 18 to 20 years, right? Only facial tracking is not enough.
Yeah.
I also have to come with a psychological experiment. And on top of that, if I give facial tracking evidence, then it gives me a solid empirical evidence in support of my theory. So these techniques are really good. They're really cool techniques, but we should never lose sight from our contribution. What is our broader contribution? What are theoretical contribution? For example, I have a fancy paper written about big data, but I'm not able to sell it anywhere because they're saying there's no theory. So what you're saying that, okay, based on big data, you found this, but what's your theoretical grounding? What's your contribution? They'll still come back and ask you this question.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Because it's just to understand, how soon this would become mainstream, and will it be, because most of the time they end up saying that, you may end up replacing the ways where people want to share their narratives, and they don't even know what they're feeling, but the mind is working in a very different way. So from that aspect, I think the triangulation part may really help, address this point.
So that's why, Chetna, you should look for partners. Strategic partners. Someone is good in running experiments, someone is good in running neuroimaging, right? Because there's no way you can do everything.
Yes.
There's no way. You can look at cross-country partners. Someone collects data from a Western country, someone collects data from an Eastern country, right? And hence partnerships, they help us to achieve mission impossible. There's not much we can do on our own. We need partners. We need strategic partners.
That's definitely, I completely agree with you. Professor Preeta, would you like to add something?
I was just thinking aloud that yesterday we had this talk from Mr. Vivek Balraman. He came from TCS Research, and he spoke about computational behavioral studies or behavioral sciences. So here he talked of multimodal modeling. He spoke about, so they're looking at non-intrusive ways as well to be able to, from live organic settings, pick up behavioral aspects without, flagging or alerting consumers in their live settings, which is, useful in being able to pick up real-time organic reactions to certain things. So especially in the space of well-being, where we are talking about, how people are affected because of COVID and things around us, and how we can keep accessing some tools which will help us to help companies or hospitals get alerts on what sort of moods people are in, whether they're going into depression and so on and so forth. So great work happening there. And like you rightly said, these collaborations between, the ideas and the methods can really kind of take us forward in this direction of helping, I think, not just the research world, but society at large.
You're right, absolutely. That should be our ultimate goal. For example, in Singapore, I know there have been devices. For example, when you enter a shopping mall, there could be an ad. Behind that ad, there could be tiny cameras which could track your face in real time, match your name with a database. For example, if I'm entering the shopping mall, they can predict I'm 45 years old, and they will actually start showing ads based on my lifestyle, based on my demographics, right? But in Australia, you can't do that because that's intrusion into your privacy. You cannot pull out my data and start showing ads, right? So yes. So what you're saying, Preeta, is if we can partner with these people and you can actually do a study in a naturalistic setting, we get additional evidence and we can actually improve our generalizability or external validity. But for causal evidence, we still need to go back to our drawing board and our lab experiment. So triangulation and multimodal is probably the way to go. Because when you send it to a journal, the first thing they look at, what is your contribution to theory, right? But then journal also, they differ on the degree of appliedness. So pure marketing journals like Journal of Consumer Research, they could be more focused on theory building. Whereas a journal like JAMS, they could be also focusing on theory and practical application.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we've been able to address all the questions and to the satisfaction of the people who asked them. So thank you so much, Dr. Roy. The session was truly insightful, and there was no second thoughts about it, but you actually made the session very fun and interactive. So thank you so much for that. I loved the way you demonstrated the correlation examples of how US space experiments and the parents and children relationship. I think it's a very it's right there, and as researchers we need to be very, very aware of such situations, such traps that we fall in, that numbers are good, but the way we read them would make a lot of difference. I would also like to thank you for your generous expression of extending your support, guidance, and even the collaboration that you have offered to us and to all the attendees. Prior to this, so this is for the attendees. Prior to the session, we started it. Dr. Roy is very happy to help us out, and he says that he is very easily reachable. So his details are there on his profile. So feel free to reach out to him if any way you need help, or if there is any follow-up there. So thank you so much. It was personally also a great engaging experience. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Professor Narayanan, if he's around. But thank you, Chetna, you did a wonderful job, and thank you, Preeta, for the opportunity. Thanks, Flame University. We look forward to more partnerships in the future.
That's great.
Thank you, Rajat. Thank you so much.